Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for our April webinar. Today, we're talking about the topic of questions and asking ourselves, do questions matter? And does the way we ask questions matter, both for ourselves and how we encourage our students to ask questions as well? Before we get too far along, I do want to take a moment to go over just a couple little things with Zoom. If you are viewing full screen, I tend to recommend that you exit full screen. And the way to do that is to go to View Options up at the top of your window there, and you should see an option to exit full screen, or you can try hitting Escape. And the reason for this is it will allow you to dock the chat window to the side of your screen. And we will have a few opportunities today throughout our presentation to share our thoughts in the chat window. And another note about the chat window is to make sure that you have it set to send to everyone. So you'll do that by clicking where it says to and making sure in that dropdown you have everyone selected. That way you can share ideas amongst each other as well. And another quick note before we get too far along, I am recording this session, so don't worry too much about trying to take down notes. You'll be able to review the session as a recording later. We also send out a follow-up email with the link to the recording as well as all the relevant links from the webinar that we share. And we are going to have an opportunity to do some activities together later, and it would be great if you could have a pen and paper ready or pencil and paper ready. So if you can snag one here as we get rolling, that would be great. So we are coming to you from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where our mission is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. I'm happy to say that the pond is looking more and more like this every day. Spring is finally setting in and the birds are starting to come back, and it's a really exciting time of year to be thinking about exploring the outdoors. So I'm from the K-12 education team, and my name is Kelly Schaefer. I'm our outreach coordinator, and I'm joined today by friend and colleague Susan Licker in the chat window, who is our learning coordinator, and she will be sharing links and helping to keep track of questions and answer questions for you. So please feel free to use Susan as a resource. And here on the K-12 education team, our mission is to create innovative resources and deliver transformative trainings that empower educators to build young people's science skills through nature, participatory science, and inquiry. So basically what we do is we have all of these great resources that we take from inspiration from the lab resources that are available and making them ready for educators, and just from birds and science in general. And most of our resources touch on one or more of these three pillars: nature connection, participatory science, and inquiry. And we have resources and trainings around all of those things. And today we're going to be talking more on the inquiry and science side with a nature focus. So we'll be talking about how asking questions can help our student learning, but also how having our students ask questions can inspire student science investigations. So basically, a lot of our resources are focused on having students build their science identity and get more comfortable viewing themselves as scientists. Because when you ask a child to draw a scientist, this is often the sort of image you get. A guy in a lab coat with some beakers and equations. Sometimes there's crazy hair. This guy has a really excellent mustache. And this is science, right? But it's kind of a narrow conception of science. And we want to help students broaden their horizons and start to view science as something that can happen out in the world and out in nature, all the way to viewing themselves as scientists when they are out in nature making observations and asking questions. So let's tie that into today's webinar, because really today is all about that idea that we can help our students build science process skills and even start investigations in the ways that we ask questions and encourage our students to ask questions. So today we will be discussing the benefits of asking open-ended questions. We'll discover ways that we can boost curiosity and inspire schoolyard investigations. We'll have a couple opportunities to practice making observations and asking questions. And if there's time, we'll explore some ways that we can turn curious questions into testable questions. Let's get started with question 101. As educators, you know how useful asking questions of your students can be, but I want to just take a moment and throw this question out to you and think about, what are some of your goals when you're asking questions of your students? What are some things that you're hoping to find out by asking questions, or hoping to achieve by asking questions? Child to think deeper about a topic, to activate prior knowledge, comprehension, listening skills, see the student's perspective, understands the child's thinking and their viewpoint, practice tying academic vocabulary into their regular vocabulary. That's awesome. Figure out what they know, understand, and can apply. Involvement in the process. Yeah, just keeping them engaged. Absolutely. Enhancing their curiosity and supporting their question asking. Awesome. So when I was thinking about this webinar, I was poking around Cornell, and they have some resources for professors about asking questions too. And I figured if I asked you this question, you would come up with pretty much what was on their list too, about why asking questions is important. And sure enough, I think you guys hit every point. Asking questions can help us see what students' understanding of the content is. It can help students focus on what is important by emphasizing the details you want them to know. It can increase content retention in students. It can help keep them engaged and excited in the learning process. Asking good questions can also really drive discussion, so you can create opportunities for students to learn from each other, and also stimulate critical and creative thinking, and demonstrate how students are thinking about the topics that you're asking about. And some questions will do one of these things, some questions will do multiple of these things. So there's all sorts of different kinds of questions. And like any skill, asking questions is something we can always improve. And so I want to take a look at a couple of the different kinds of questions and how they could help us achieve some of our goals. The two types of questions we're going to talk about today, you're probably familiar with: closed-ended questions and open-ended questions. So for closed-ended questions, we're talking about questions that can be easily answered in 1 or 2 words. They're often yes or no, and often have a right or wrong answer. They're definitely have a place in classrooms. They're really useful when you want to quickly check comprehension. But they aren't always great questions for stimulating discussion and understanding how our students are thinking about things. And that's kind of where open-ended questions come into play. So open-ended questions encourage more detailed response. They cannot be answered with a yes or no, or just that couple word answer. And they do not always have a specific correct answer. Often they are questions that you can answer in multiple ways. And they really provide us as educators with the opportunity to gather a better understanding of our students' knowledge and how they're thinking while helping them build important skills. So let's take a closer look at open-ended questions and how they can help us build curious classrooms. There are lots of benefits to asking open-ended questions. Actually, there we go. We skipped a slide. From the perspective of our students, asking open-ended questions can really help build a bunch of skills. So it can help build critical thinking. Since there's no right or wrong answer, students are given the space to problem solve, to think through different scenarios, and try different approaches to answer the question you're asking. It also encourages creative thinking. So similarly, students are given the freedom to think outside of the box and use their imagination to expand on what they already know. As was mentioned when you all brought up the things that you're trying to achieve when asking questions, it builds vocabulary skills, it builds communication skills. You're having students use the communication skills to provide in-depth answers, providing opportunities to integrate vocabulary, share evidence and reasoning, and challenging students to articulate what they're thinking. And doing these things really can help build student confidence. So the more that students have the opportunity to express themselves and their thoughts, the more confidence they build in themselves and in sharing their ideas in general. And this can be a really fun process to see when your students get more and more comfortable kind of thinking through things out loud. And for us as educators, asking open-ended questions can really help us stimulate more meaningful discussions, can boost that engagement and excitement for learning, and illustrate student thought processes. I really like to think that asking and answering open-ended questions helps both the student and us as educators by making thinking visible. So you're challenging students to articulate how they're thinking and why they're thinking what they're thinking and provide evidence. And sometimes I feel like, when you just blurt out an answer, you haven't slowed down to think about how you get there. And so that process of thinking that through and articulating it can be kind of fun and surprising for students. And for educators, we get a look at the ways our students are approaching answering questions, and it can even provide us with an opportunity to notice any gaps in knowledge. So we've talked a little bit about the benefits and the opportunities of asking open-ended questions. I want to pause and think for a moment about how we can prepare our students to answer these open-ended questions. So for some students, answering open-ended questions can feel kind of risky, especially at first. As educators, I want to throw this out to you. What are some ways we can create an environment that encourages students to feel confident when answering these open-ended questions and sharing their thought processes? What are some things that you do to help create that atmosphere in your classroom? Are we saying building relationships? Yeah, absolutely. Having kind of a trust relationship with your students that you're not going to shoot down a wrong answer really harshly. You're going to encourage them to think through things. Kristen's echoing that idea too, that there's some social emotional work that can do. Students need to feel sure that others will support them. Have rules for sharing. Yep. Show them that you care for their success and win their trust. Find ways to connect and appreciate students' responses. Ask them questions about their thinking. Elizabeth is suggesting having them discuss with a peer before they share with everyone. Turn and talk with a partner, Kate says as well. Yeah, so those pair and share techniques where you have a lower stakes environment to kind of talk through what you're thinking and also a peer to bounce ideas off of makes it so much easier to share with a larger group. Peter's saying he likes to use some wrong, in quotation, answers from previous or fictitious classes to demonstrate how useful errors are for learning. I love that. Yeah, it's easy to say there's no wrong answer here, but to actually provide an example for them about how an answer that might not be the most accurate can still provide you with a lot of benefits and helping illuminate thinking or even driving you to ask the questions that are going to help you arrive at the answer you're looking for. Awesome. Thanks for sharing all those wonderful thoughts. I loved this theme of trust that came up a lot too. It can be challenging to build that as an educator in all the classrooms. And if you're a non-formal educator and you're seeing students only once or only for an hour over a couple weeks, and then you never see them again, those relationships can be challenging to build. But there are things that we can do, as you all pointed out, to help create an atmosphere where students can feel comfortable answering open-ended questions. And some of that is modeling asking questions. So modeling asking questions for clarification or just modeling that curiosity. This one is one that I struggled with when I first started teaching, was embracing the awkward silence. So when you ask those kind of bigger questions, you got to give space and adequate time for the students to answer. And sometimes that means letting the silence hang. Encourage responses, even when the answer is unclear and inaccurate. Thank somebody for responding, ask for clarification, dive deeper into what they're thinking. And always, always, it's great to model active listening by asking those probing questions. And that can help with that atmosphere of trust that you guys were talking about. Listening and showing you're really paying attention to what students say matters so much to them. And similar with that kind of think and pair share sort of scenario brought up, encouraging students to respond to each other and build on ideas can create these really lively and fun discussions. And encourage curiosity of all kinds. You know, if you get asked a question, you know, model that, I don't know, or provides a space for students to keep those questions that you don't know the answer to right off the bat. So just encourage curiosity in general, I think can kind of create this atmosphere where people feel like less pressured to be right all the time, right? We're just being curious. And when I was thinking about this webinar, this quote came to mind from Henry David Thoreau. The greatest compliment that was ever paid to me was when someone asked me what I thought and attended to my answer. And so creating that classroom space where students can share their thought processes and know that they will be listened to builds that trust that you're talking about. All right, so we've talked about kind of the underpinnings of why ask these questions and a little bit about how to create an atmosphere where asking those questions can be successful, I want to take a moment to think about ways that we can capture that curiosity. And so what I want to kind of focus on now is turning to this nature-based aspect of asking questions and how we ask questions can take things to the next level for our students and even provide opportunities to get our students to ask their own open-ended questions and turn those into great learning opportunities through things like investigations. So if you've ever taken kids outside, you probably have run into some incredibly curious questions based on some cool phenomena that you've seen. So when you're out there seeing wacky things happening in the wild, these can be really incredible learning opportunities that spark your students' curiosity and get them asking their own questions. And how we respond to those questions and observations can either really encourage that curiosity and dive into some deeper thinking, or it can kind of shut things down with kind of a closed answer.
Kelly, so Kelly, you just completely faded out.
Okay.
You're back now, but
All right. I will try a headset here just in case. Give me 1 second, folks. Apologies.
just for everyone on the call, Kelly's been having some problems. Oh, it says my internet's unstable. So maybe it's me, Kelly. Can everyone else hear Kelly okay?
Okay. How about
Okay.
now? Am I still all right here?
Yes.
Okay. We'll stick
So
with the
sorry.
headset. No, it's okay. I'd rather have us know where we stand. So awesome. Okay, let's get rolling back with our outdoor phenomena. I love these photos. They really get my brain rolling. And personally, I find the deer, the turkey to be pretty hilarious. But let's dive into one of them and think about how we respond to observations about, for example, this pigeon could, in a closed or open way, could encourage or discourage curiosity and these discourse and discussion. So say we see this bird on a fountain. There's a couple ways that I could respond to this, right? If I make a statement like, look at that pigeon drinking. I've just told you what the bird is and what I see as fact, what it's doing. So basically I've closed off discussion around what's happening. Where I could dive a little deeper by inviting you to observe with me and asking questions like, what species is that? A little more open, but still pretty close. There is one right answer, and it's a rock pigeon. Or I guess maybe there's two right answers if you are still a proponent of the name rock dove. And then you can start moving down this spectrum, right? So if you don't know that, if we're asking this closed question about what species is that, if you don't know the answer, it might make you feel kind of bad and like unwelcome to participate and make you check out a little bit. So if we open our response, excuse me, our questions up a little bit more, we could say something like, what clues can we use to identify this species? That invites some discussion. It invites some opportunity to observe the bird more closely and pick out parts to talk about. Other ways you could invite discussion are, what is the bird doing? Or asking for your opinion. Why do you think it's doing that? You can begin to get even deeper into related content and invite even deeper discussion by asking questions like, how do birds survive in cities? You can go even a step further than that and get students thinking about experiments by asking an open-ended question like, will all birds drink from fountains? or even propose an experiment by asking, will putting out a bird bath attract birds? So the way that we respond to these observations that we have outside, whether we take a closed or open approach, can really affect how our students are going to experience this phenomenon and how they're going to think about it and relate to it. And so the more that you are out there in nature, practicing making observations like these and asking questions that get your students to think a little deeper about what they're seeing, the more opportunities you're going to have to capture some great questions that are going to come up. Students are going to ask things that you don't know the answer to, or things that might be exciting to look into later. And so for that, we recommend classrooms have a wonder wall. So the idea behind a wonder wall is that this is a designated space where folks can put questions that they want to have answered later, or just curiosities that they want to capture for later. You can do this in a couple ways. You can have a section on a whiteboard where people can come up and write. You can have a piece of paper and post-it notes, and kids can have post-it notes on their desk, and they can go up and add questions as they come up. This does a few things for us. This really welcomes curiosity, so helps build that atmosphere of curiosity, and even builds into that space where students feel confident in asking open-ended questions, because you're really showing or answering open-ended questions, sorry, because you're really showing how important their thoughts are and their curiosities are. You can capture questions that you don't have time to answer in the moment, or that you don't immediately know the answer to, so you can return to them. It provides an opportunity for you to model asking questions. So if you have a curiosity, you could model saving that question for later and putting it on the wonder wall as well. And also, this becomes just an incredible bank of questions that you can draw from for further learning. So you could investigate them together as a class, or you could even develop them into inquiry projects. So we're going to talk a little bit about that side of things now, and having our students start asking questions and helping them really harness their observations into asking great questions. And I want to highlight for you a resource that we've recently released called Students as Scientists, Nature-Based Inquiry. And it is a grade-banded resource for K-5 and 6-12. And it uses nature to inspire student curiosity and scientific investigations. It is a free downloadable unit with 6 lessons. It's got a ton of supporting material, including slides and student journals, and a whole website with links to videos of phenomena and things like that. So everything you need to guide your students through the inquiry process is really included in this curriculum, in this unit. And I wanted to kind of show you this image here. It is an image of a timeline of the resource and it is also all of the lessons inside the resource here along this line. And so you can kind of see the full inquiry process as we have laid it out within the curriculum here. And you can see that the first 2 lessons, Explore Science and Make Observations, are kind of the foundational lessons before you start getting into student-led investigations in part of lesson 3. And we're going to be focusing mostly on parts of lessons 2 and 3 today. The Explore Science lesson is amazing. I love this lesson. I pulled from it for a few times, and it's been fantastic. But it's about helping students understand what science is and who scientists are, and see that science can be done by anyone. All right, so let's dive into the science process a little bit. This is the science process as we present it in this curriculum. you'll see we have it in this really kind of cyclical image where all of these pieces and parts feed into each other, but they can also step backwards, right? Like you might get to a part where you are collecting evidence, but you realize that the evidence you're collecting isn't really going to answer the question. So you need to take a step back and go to the design and tweak some things and come back out. So that's what I love about this diagram is it really shows kind of the messy nature of science and how it really is a process that builds on itself. And so we are going to focus now on this top section, observe and wonder, which is really the underpinning of the science process. Just seeing what is going on in the world around us and getting inspired to ask questions and harnessing that wonder into asking a research question. So there are 4 activities in this lesson. We're going to focus on 2 and 4, observe a phenomenon and observation versus inference. So in this lesson, observe a phenomenon, we suggest several different ways that you can have a phenomenon that your students observe. So photos or videos of animals are great. Live cams are fantastic. Natural items are great as well. Complex systems like aquariums or a classroom pet, or even interesting objects in your schoolyard or a nearby green space are great as well. For the purposes of today, we are going to use a clip from the lab's bird cam for the barred owls. So this is a fantastic resource. It is a live cam, but because I wanted us to be sure we had something to look out, they always have highlight clips. And so this is a highlight clip from, I think it was last night. So I'll go ahead and play this. And if you have a pencil or paper, please bring it out because I want to challenge you to write down as many observations as you can while you're watching this. And I really do encourage you to write them and not just think them out because that process is important here. And one of the things that I love about this lesson and this activity is it really shows that observation is a skill that you can practice, and this is a great way to practice it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start this clip and have your pencils ready. So please feel free to share in the chat window. What were some things that you observed while watching this clip of the barred owls? Rachel noticed that the babies were jumping around when the adult came in. Elizabeth noticed that the chicks do not share well with each other. Peter's noticing that one chick got the frog first, and then the parent tore it away. Notice that both chicks had problems swallowing the frog. Yeah, and that the parent tried feeding it to different chicks. Naomi noticed that the chicks kept checking the adult's beak, so their beak kept touching the adult's beak. That's cool. Kate's saying that when the chicks dropped it, the adult stepped in to help them. Kristen's asking, was the frog already dead? True noticed that the adult shook its head while it was holding the frog, and the three chicks crowded closer with that movement. The chick on the right pecked the parent's beak, maybe an attempt to get the parent to regurgitate. Rachel's noticing that chicks 2 and 3 fought, and then the adult sat on them all to calm them. Awesome. Lots of great observations. Feel free to keep them coming. As we're looking at these observations, something you'll notice in your own observations and your students' observations is that pure observations will often be mixed in with inferences. So you've probably had students really confidently declare something when you're outside making observations like, look, those squirrels are kissing, or that bird is telling the others how to get home. And those are things that, well, you can't really know, or they might not actually be what's happening. And it can be tricky to know how to respond to something like that. Your instinct could be to correct them, or maybe say what you think is happening. Other times you might just want to simply support them and their enthusiasm and say, maybe, and provide some opportunity for others to share. One of the things that we can do, though, is talk about the difference between observations and inference. So it can be a great way to encourage a sense of wonder about the natural world is to observe it closely. And then when you kind of bring in this idea of an inference, it gets students to start realize that they're applying their own thought processes and evidence to it. So an observation, strictly speaking, is something you experience with your senses. So if we were looking at this picture of the osprey holding a fish, for example, an observation of this, I would say, is that the osprey is carrying a fish in its talons, and that the fish is facing the same direction as the osprey. Those would both be observations. An inference in this case is an explanation or a guess about your observations based on what you already know and evidence from your observations. In this case, an inference about the osprey and the fish will be that the osprey is going to eat the fish. I can say that because I know that osprey are fish eagles and they eat fish. But in reality, it might not be planning to eat the fish itself. It might have a nest that it's going to feed the young, or it's going to feed the fish to its young. Another inference would be that it's holding the fish facing forward or facing the same direction it is to help with aerodynamics. So things like that would be kind of taking and applying what you know to something you've observed. I did just see a question regarding the slides. I will be sharing a link to the YouTube, like a recording of this, but this osprey image is in slides for the 3-5 curriculum that you can download yourself as well. So there are some great slides in there, definitely worth checking out. All right, so now that we know a little bit about observation and inference, I want you to pause for a sec and go back and look at your list of observations that you made about the barred owl and see if you can identify any inferences that you made. If you can find an inference that you made, please feel free to share that in the chat window, just so we can point out some of the differences. And I can scroll back up for a moment too, because there were a couple great examples of observations and inferences that were shared earlier. So for example, somebody observed that the chick on the right side of the screen pecked at the parent's beak. Observation, and then said maybe an attempt to get the parent to regurgitate. And that would be an inference, right? So you're combining that observation with things you already know. So that's a great inference. I believe there was another good one in there. Oh yeah, so the chicks fighting and then the adults sitting on the chicks to calm them. So that's a cool inference, right? Like maybe the adult is trying to keep the chicks from fighting. That would be an inference. Elizabeth is sharing an inference that the chick on the right was very aggressive, must be hungry. And then I see a comment that, wow, about half of what I wrote down were inferences. Yeah, absolutely. Me too. So it's really easy to take that next step and make an inference, right? And there's nothing wrong with making inferences. It's just you don't always know if your inference is right. So being able to separate out an observation from an inference is good for that purpose. So you can have your prior observations. But also it's kind of fun to separate out the inferences because you are starting to see how your mind is working, right? You're starting to see that, oh, I know that owls feed their babies and that the babies get the food from the owl's mouth. So I'm assuming that the baby is checking out the mom's mouth because it wants food. And those are great inferences, probably pretty correct, but not can't say for sure, but it's cool to kind of illuminate that process of thinking. All right. Thank you for doing that. We are going to take this now to the next level. So we've talked about observations and we've talked about inferences. Now I want us to try to just come up with questions. We're going to put the same video on, and now I want you to start thinking up as many questions as you can come up with about this video clip. right, I'll go ahead and stop us there. So what kind of questions did you all come up with? Please share some in the chat window. I noticed somebody had asked a question earlier. They had asked whether the frog was dead or not when the parent brought it in. And that was a great question. It made me wonder, do the parents always bring back dead prey? What kind of frog is it? How old are the chicks? Is it the mom or the dad feeding them? Why does the parent let the chicks try to eat a whole frog? Is the mom eating also? Does it taste good? You know, I've never had frog legs, so now I'm wondering too. How is the nest cut clean? Do both parents feed the chicks? Why does mom dangle the frog? Does she choose which chick to feed? Is one frog enough to feed them all? So many great questions. When were the babies hatched? How large are they compared to the parent? What did it sound like in there? Yeah, there wasn't a lot of sound coming through on the very edge of my hearing, and I have headphones in. I could hear the owl's high-pitched calls, but part of it is it helps to know what the baby owls sound like. I found myself wondering about a phenomenon that's not totally uncommon in owls, which is siblicide. So often in some owl species, you see some aggression here or some pecking between the owlets that could be aggression. And sometimes one owlet will end up smaller than others, and the siblings will eat that owlet. And it made me wonder, is that something that happens in barred owls or not? I knew it happened in some species of owls, but I don't know about barred owls. Another questions I'm seeing is, how much do the chicks need to eat? So lots of great questions coming out of here. And these sorts of phenomenon are fantastic question generators, and there's so many great ways to access them, as I shared earlier. I love wildlife cams for practicing asking questions, because you can pick a really obvious phenomenon, something you know that you're going to observe. And I think that practicing observations is really useful. So in the curriculum, these two things that we did, three things that we just did are in the curriculum. The first part of just the observations is lesson 2, activity 1, I think. And then, no, activity 2. And then we did activity 4, which was the inferences and observations. And then this is the first part of the third activity, the first activity of the third lesson, which is the one that starts to dive into asking scientific questions. So a lot of the questions that we asked were reference questions, right? They were things that you could find the answer to via researching sources or other data that's already out there. And so refining a question to become a testable question is a whole beast to itself. It doesn't look like we're really going to have time to get into that tonight, because I want to make sure I leave time for questions in the question webinar. But I just wanted to share with you that this lesson does get into that. So the first part is this practicing asking questions, and then we talk about the different ways to answer scientific questions. Then we provide students with time to actually start asking questions about the phenomenon you want them to do their projects around. There's a 612 only lesson on refining scientific questions. And then the last part is choosing your testable question. So we go in this lesson in the curriculum, we transition from these kind of higher level practicing observations and practicing asking questions into starting to do student-led investigations. So yeah, just wanted to give you kind of that overview. And I just wanted to have fun with you guys today, thinking about questions and practicing asking some questions and thinking about how we can use them to enhance our student learning. So I want to open the floor to you all if you have any questions to ask while we're here together.
Kelly, there was one question in the chat already that I'm gonna read back to you. So I always have a tough time getting the Wonderwall to be alive past current lessons. How do we help students keep going back to the wall? And then the second part is, I also wonder, once they put up a question, how do we help them take the next step to figure out if it is investigatable and what they can do next? I'll also repaste it into the chat for everyone.
Okay. Fantastic questions. Yeah, the Wonderwall, I think, does take a little work to keep alive. And one of the best ways that I've seen it kept alive, and one of the ways that's been most effective for me, is I keep modeling using it. So when I have a question, I model using it, or I say, oh, great question. I don't know the answer. Put that on our Wonderwall. So prompting and modeling I think are pretty effective ways. And then, once it gets in kind of I was gonna say classroom zeitgeist, but there has to be a better way to put that. Once it gets in the classroom norms, it can kind of run from there, but I do think it takes a little attention and work to keep running. And then that part of turning those questions into testable questions, that is hard. It is hard. And the curriculum spends a lot of time on making sure we can help you do that, because we recognize that it is hard. And I skipped it because I knew we might not have time for it, but I'll go back to a couple slides here. So we do have a section, this is from the 612 slides, about creating a testable question. And we run through a whole scenario of a curious question and how to make it testable using these the SMART acronym. So making it specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and temporal. So this is going to help you make sure it is a question that you can answer with the time and resources that you have, that it's framed in a way that is measurable, so it can actually be answered, and that the data you're getting and collecting is going to be relevant to answering that question. So this scenario is fantastic. Again, these slides are taken from the slides that you can download as part of the curriculum. So if you want to take a look through them, they're great. Hopefully that helps. I know it wasn't a really direct answer, but I do want to just acknowledge that that is a really challenging part of this process, is developing the testable question. Rachel's asking, is there a way to offer this kind of approach in a 2-hour outdoor education guided hike? Yeah, so you won't get all of the way towards like a testable question, right? But you can absolutely do questions and inferences. I have done hikes before where the theme has been just asking questions. And that can be a fun way to just get at it and make those practices. You can kind of start them with the observation part and bring in the inferences as you go along. And you're just challenging them to make observations as they go along and ask questions. There's also a great resource for you, I think you should check out, called Beetles, which is all about inquiry practices for the outdoors. And in this way, it's not like inquiry investigation. It's more like inquiry in terms of just asking really open-ended questions and making really open-ended observations. Yeah, so hopefully that is helpful. They have some really great like prompts that I think would be useful for you. There was a question that got posed to me earlier in the day today, and that was about how do you incorporate questions effectively into an asynchronous setting? And this is something, if there are folks here who have ideas and experience doing this, I would love to hear your thoughts in the chat window as well. It's challenging to ask really good questions in that setting, just because of that. I mean, you can ask great questions. I'm sorry, you can ask great questions in that setting, but you do lose some of that discussion benefit, right? So I would focus on asking open-ended questions. But another thing I like to do sometimes is challenge the students to write the question. So, you know, if you go through a unit in this online asynchronous style, one of the things you could challenge them to do is to write an open-ended question. And of course, this would need some framing about that unit, about like some part of that unit, and that would help you judge what they think the important part of it is. So like challenge them to design an essay question for that unit. I've done that before, and that's kind of fun. Yeah, so if anybody has more thoughts on how to do questions in an asynchronous setting, I would love to hear those as well. And then I think there was a question regarding fourth graders getting to a testable question. Yeah, I do think they can. And I think it might need to be more of a guided process. So for the 612 version of this curriculum, or excuse me, of this science unit, we tend to encourage more individual and small group projects. But for K5, one of the things we suggest and one of the things that can be really effective is working as a class to develop a question. So that way you're kind of pooling all of the resources. You can spend as much time together as you need to get to that place with the testable question. We do use the SMART, I want to say objectives, but that's not the right term. We do use the SMART acronym in the K5 as well to help with the framing of the question. We have some great example studies. We've had a combined, was it a combined first and second grade class? It might have been K and 1, but it was a combined class, and first grade was one of them, that did a project around, does the depth of snow affect the number of birds at our feeder? And sure, the teacher absolutely helped develop that question, but the students were part of that question development too. It is possible, and I think the curriculum will really help you do that. But yeah, it is honestly the toughest part of this is getting those testable questions. I think that can be really challenging, but it's also super, super rewarding. It's fantastic when students get that question and can start investigating it and finding their answer. All right, so I realize we are at time. I'm going to throw up our contact info. I think Susan already put it in the chat window, but if you would like a letter of completion for one contact hour, please feel free to email us at k12lab@cornell.edu. If you have further questions about this topic or just want to stay in touch, you can always reach us there as well or on our socials. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to hang out for a few minutes longer if you continue to have questions, and we hope to see you at a future webinar. Thanks for coming.
Kelly, there was one up here. Do you have some examples of feedback?
And if the person is still here, can you clarify what kind of feedback you mean? I'm trying to scroll back, but the chat window is moving very quickly at the moment. feedback that teacher gives to students regarding maybe the question formation. Yeah, I don't have specific guided feedback there. We do have, and Susan, remind me if the K-5 has this. There's like a student journal.
Yes,
Okay.
both grade bands have student journals.
Yeah, so as part of this process, there's a student journal where you can sort of start to keep track of all these different pieces as they're developing. So that provides you with a really good opportunity to provide feedback and take a close look at what students are thinking and how they're thinking about it. I don't have specific examples of the type of feedback, but if that's a question you have as you're, doing an activity like this, I hope you would feel free to reach out and maybe we could help figure that out. All right, I'm going to hang out for a few more minutes. I am going to mute myself for a second here, but just want to say one more time, thank you so much for coming tonight. I hope you are all having a wonderful spring and look forward to seeing you in a future webinar.